So welcome. It's so good to see all of you tonight. My name is LaVeta Gilmore Jones, and I am the co-director with Levin Community. And I am part of this work because housing and equity and places for people to live is very real to me and in my heart. My uncle would have been someone who was on the streets had it not been for the fact that we had family that provided a home for him. But that is not the case with so many other people. And so my desire is that all people have a place to call home. So thank you for being here and for being engaged in this work with us. Tonight, we are going to turn our attention toward the action part of our sacred organizing cycle. Yasmin will help us and ground us in our bodies and our breath in the land. And then Marianne will reground us in the sacred organizing spiral. And then our friends Ron Warner Jr. from Together Lab and Cole Merkel from Here Together will help bring us up to speed on what's at stake in the upcoming city and county budget process and what we're hoping and why we're hoping to mobilize our cohort to submit public testimony and to show up for collective action at the May 11th Portland City Council budget hearing. And finally, with the help of Mira and Ron and several other core team leaders, we hope that we'll leave tonight with three things. One, a better understanding of what makes for powerful public testimony. The second, that our own testimonies to share with the elected officials, or at least we'll get started on writing a draft for that. And then third, the start of a turnout plan to engage our fellow community members in concrete actions to ensure that all Oregonians can come home. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Yasmin, who is going to lead us in our land acknowledgement and spiritual grounding. Yasmin?
Gracias, Levita. Mi nombre es Yasmin Vélez y soy parte del condado de Multnomah. Estoy aquí para compartir y enraizarnos en estas tierras sagradas. Nos reunimos en una tierra sagrada y viva, las tierras que nos apoyan y nos sostienen. Reconocemos que esta región es el territorio ancestral y nos cedió de los pueblos originarios de las bandas Multnomah, Huasco, Clackamas, Clatamen, Conswell, Willamen, Tuswater, Cascade, de los pueblos Chinoacán, la banda Tualatin de Calapuya y muchas otras tribus que establecieron en sus hogares y a lo largo de los ríos Columbia, Willamen. Hoy vivimos y prosperamos en una relación profunda, compleja e independiente con la tierra y otros seres. Y mucho más antes, asentamientos colonial blancos. Reconocemos que estamos aquí debido a las políticas sistemáticas de genocidio, reubicación y asimilación que les impulsó. Hoy reconocemos a las diversas y vibrantes comunidades indígenas de la religión que siguen conectadas a estas tierras, pueblos indígenas, 70,000 personas con más de 280 tribus, con al menos 18 lenguas distintas, tanto locales como lejanas. Extendemos nuestras más profundas gratitud a nuestros hermanos y ancianos, pasados y presentes, a que han administrado estas tierras y que mantienen las tradicionales tribales para las generaciones presentes y futuras. Los invito a que hagamos un momento de silencio y señal de reverencia, gratitud y gratitud. Gracias. Ahora les voy a compartir un poema donde vamos a enraizarnos. Los invito a que cerremos nuestros ojos y respiremos. Sentamos la tierra, los árboles y mientras tanto voy a leerles un poema del profeta de un futuro que no es nuestro. Oración de San Óscar Romero, arzobispo del Salvador. De vez en cuando, dar un paso atrás nos ayuda a tomar una perspectiva mejor. El reino no solo está más allá de nuestros esfuerzos, sino incluso más allá de nuestra visión. Durante nuestra vida, no solo realizamos un minúscula parte de esa magnífica empresa que es la obra de Dios. Nada de lo que hacemos está acabado, solo que significa que el reino está siempre ante nosotros. Ninguna declaración dice todo lo que podríamos decirse. Ninguna oración puede expresar plenamente nuestra fe. Ninguna confesión trae la perfección, ninguna visión pastoral trae la integridad. Ningún programa realiza la misión de la iglesia. En ningún esquema de metas y objetivos se incluye todo. Esto es lo que intentamos hacer. Plantamos semillas que un día crecerán. Regamos semillas y plantamos, sabiendo que son promesas de un futuro. Sentamos bases que necesitarán un mayor desarrollo. Los efectos de la levadura que proporcionamos van más allá de nuestras posibilidades. No podemos hacerlo todo y al darnos cuenta de ello, sentimos una cierta liberación. Ella nos capacita a hacer algo y hacerlo muy bien. Puede que sea incompleto, pero en un principio, un paseo en el camino, una ocasión para que entre la gracia del Señor y haga el resto. Es posible que no veamos nunca los resultados finales, pero esa es la diferencia entre el jefe de obras y el albañil. Somos albañiles, no somos jefes de obra, ni ministros, no el Mesías. Somos profetas de un futuro que no es nuestro. Amén. Gracias por escuchar este poema y quiero invitar a María, que ella nos va a compartir el reencuentro del espiral.
Thank you, Yasmin.
Gracias.
Okay, thank you, Yasmin. So can I have the slide of the spiral? Thanks, Josh. I'm going to reground us in the sacred work that we've embraced since the fall. And we're going to do that by revisiting the sacred organizing spiral. This will help us understand how our actions this month are a continuation of our movement around the spiral. In October through December, we focused on sacred encounters as we listened to ourselves and each other's. We built our core teams or reconnected with them. We did one-to-ones. We went deeper into our own personal stories and the stories of our team members and our faith communities. And we began to explore our personal land stories and those of our faith communities. In January through March, we moved into sacred unveiling, getting clearer about where power lies to initiate change. Through research meetings and house meetings, we've started to uncover how the housing pressures we and our neighbors face are actually systemic problems. And we're beginning to discern faithful steps for how we can act together to address those injustices and transform those systems. Now we're ready to take sacred action, using our collective power to tell a public story. Tonight, we will begin to practice skills that will allow us to take this collective action during upcoming budget hearings. On May 11th in the afternoon, there will be an opportunity for our cohort to come together and use our collective power by taking action at city budget hearings. We recognize that core teams are currently focused on many activities within their communities and neighborhoods, exploring land genealogy at First Emmanuel Lutheran, building community support for affordable housing at Saints Peter and Paul Episcopal, and starting the planning process to build affordable housing at St. Philip the Deacon. This is how organizing looks, though: short-term actions that are nimble and responsive, and that happen alongside long-term, slower work, building relationships and building power. These activities are mutually reinforcing each other. Over the past few years, we have lost some muscle memory about why we need to act together and how powerful it is as a group, how powerful we are as a group. As we regain this memory, we will recognize the multiple opportunities we have to come together and support each other's actions. Collective action is the key to organizing, and we are so much more powerful together. And now I think I'm supposed to introduce Ron Warner.
Thanks, Marianne, and thank you, everyone. It's really wonderful to be here. My name is Ron Werner. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the director of Together Lab, and I am here tonight because the housing insecure people that I love in my life do not have enough money to buy change. They can't buy Twitter, and they certainly can't buy, as many real estate developers did in a news report that I read today in our city, new policies that support them. But I do believe that we can, with our organized power and organized people power, impact and have a change on the policies that we wish to see in our city, or at least a budget that reflects our values and the priorities surfaced as a matter of our faith and as a matter of the people whom we carry in our hearts, who are housing insecure, who are directly impacted by systemic injustice. And so that's why I'm here tonight. I'm also here as a member of our sister cohort design team out in Washington County. So it's good to see a bunch of familiar faces. And tonight I'm joined and would love to introduce to you Cole Merkel, who is the co-director of Here Together, who I'm going to have the opportunity to interview. He is a part of our sister cohort design team out in Clackamas County. So with our collective cohort efforts combined, hopefully we can be a part of some of the change that we hope to see in the larger metro region. Cole, it's great to have you with us. Welcome.
Thank you. It's fantastic to be here, and yeah, always a huge fan of Levin. You all have been strong Here Together coalition partners since way back when, along with Storyline. So really love the work you all are doing, and really appreciate the welcome that I'm getting. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, it's great to have you with us. I have a few questions to get us started, but just so everyone knows, if you'd like to use the chat along the way as I talk with Cole, because you have some questions or comments or things that are coming up for you, feel free to put them into the chat, and our chat guru, Melissa, will be kind of copying and pasting those comments and questions for later. for us to get to Cole or for us to find answers to. So Cole, feel free to not worry about what's coming up in the chat, but we hope to just capture all of the good stuff for later so we can make sure we get answers to the questions that we have from cohort participants. But maybe I could start really simply. Cole, I mean, how did you get connected to this work? I mean, what draws you to this work of making sure everyone has a place to call home?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. So I actually moved to Oregon, gosh, was it 12 years ago now, to be a Jesuit volunteer. My first role was at Operation Night Watch, and I think I see David Groff in the audience. David was the board chair at Night Watch at that point. I, in that time, was basically providing safe evening hospitality space for folks experiencing homelessness. And I recognized during that year how much I absolutely loved working with the community and providing that safe space. And that sometimes folks do just need a pair of socks or a sandwich, but sometimes they need more, and often they need more, and they need systemic change. I was really privileged to be able to then pivot that Jesuit volunteer work into work at Street Roots. I spent 8 years directing the vendor program at Street Roots, the newspaper that folks are purchasing for a quarter, selling for $1. And that felt like a moment of systemic change because you're providing income, you're providing opportunities to connect people with case managers. And it still wasn't enough because every single time we were working with a vendor and were able to get them somewhere or get them something, there was always a little bit more. And if we had a little bit more case management or a little bit more rapid rehousing funding or just a little bit more rent assistance, maybe we could make a bigger change. So I was really privileged to be able to dovetail all of that 9+ years of direct service work into something that I think moves toward a much bigger systemic picture. I joined the Here Together coalition in 2019, just as we in the city of Portland had passed a $275 million affordable housing bond. Metro, the regional government, had passed a $650 million affordable housing bond. We had nearly $1 billion in capital construction, money that's coming down the pike, units that are being built right now. And we had absolutely $0 for the wraparound services that we need for folks to be able to transition from homelessness into housing. That's everything from a rent assistance voucher to behavioral health services and recovery to case management, all of the above approach. And so I was able to join the Here Together team as we were building toward a big policy push at the region's ballot. We convened a coalition that has everybody in it, from faith leaders to homeless service providers, culturally specific providers, and the business community. Folks that aren't often sitting at the same table, all pointed in the same direction toward truly making a big impact that will benefit folks who are on the streets first, and that will create equitable outcomes, because far too often folks of color and their communities of color are experiencing homelessness at disproportionate rates. So in 2020, Metro regional government referred the supportive housing services measure to the ballot, $250 million per year for all of those supportive services. And we, as a community, said yes. And it's absolutely incredible, because when we said yes, we said that not just the city of Portland, not just Multnomah County is going to address homelessness at scale, but Washington County, Clackamas County, and Metro are all going to come and support their folks where they're at. Oftentimes a campaign coalition made up of a lot of different partners that don't necessarily always sit at the same side of the table goes away after the campaign, because it's really hard to keep it together. But with an investment this big and a promise this bold, we recognized that there was going to need to be a continued convening, a continued community way to engage, and continued communications about what the root causes of homelessness are and what the proven solutions to them are. And so we stayed around and frankly, that's been a really good thing because we are currently up against a major opposition campaign that is not messing around.
Yeah, tell me, Cole. I'm so appreciative of the staying aroundness. Sometimes after a campaign, everyone's so exhausted, everyone packs up and goes home. But part of pushing through policy is making sure that policy is operationalized and put into practice, and that leaders are held accountable to the vision for the policy. But this opposition has creeped up. I'm curious if you might speak a little bit more about who's against this. I mean, who would be against housing? Who would be against wraparound supportive services? And tell us a little bit about this opposition, People for Portland, and what's their deal?
Yeah, so let me start by just laying a couple of facts out. The supportive housing services measure passed in May of 2020, but it wasn't an immediate thing that the measure was supposed to start and the taxes were going to start rolling in. That takes a while. And so really the first year of the measure implementation was all about setting up the infrastructure, the accountability, basically bringing all four governments together in a way they've never collaborated or cooperated before to set up how we were going to address this issue systemically, rather than just a Band-Aid solution like a whole bunch of shelters. That's not going to actually end people's homelessness. In the meantime, we are still in the midst of a raging pandemic. Folks on the edge of housing insecurity have felt the impact of the pandemic in so many ways. And homelessness has looked, at the very least, like it has gotten more visible because people who are living outside have not had the community connections like the service providers, or even simple and easy, quick, regular trash pickup, and to really be able to just stay sanitary and have connection. So in the midst of all of that, while work continues to happen, work really is happening now. A couple of political consultants came together and realized that the public was really upset. There hasn't been enough communication and there hasn't been enough of a visible difference on the streets. And they recognized that they could capitalize on this moment, the frustration of the general populace, for their own means, which ultimately are chaos and trying to turn out a more frustrated and potentially conservative electorate base in the next coming elections. So the People for Portland campaign launched last August, and they have been very glossy. They've put a lot of TV ads out. You all have probably seen them. And really what they have done is two things. One, they've set a narrative that the impossible is possible. It's just for lack of political will. That if elected officials just waved their magic wand, we could reverse 40 plus years of disinvestment around homelessness. They've also pushed the public to believe that homelessness needs to simply be about getting people off the streets by any means necessary. And so I think that the place where we come from here together, the coalition comes from, is that we need an all of the above approach. Yes, shelter is part of the continuum, but shelter cannot be the last place that somebody goes. We can't just warehouse a person for years in shelter, because it should be a space where they can begin to stabilize and get into housing. And so we believed that, as we expand in shelter, we need to as much expand in more permanent housing units, more units in the private market, and making sure that as we're we're bringing people into shelter, there are the proper wraparound dollars, services, supports for mental health, behavioral health, case management to help them get into housing as they're ready, as the time comes on. So People for Portland has moved forth with a ballot measure campaign that has now been rejected twice by the Metro Regional Government as unconstitutional, that would do a couple of things. One, they are trying to get the $250 million a year supportive housing services measure to be redirected instead of this kind of balanced approach that we've been taking of shelter, services, housing, and all of the wraparound services in between. Their ballot measure would automatically on the top say that 75% of the funds would have to be invested in shelter and immediate shelter. I want to call out a really quick fallacy in that. One, shelter doesn't end homelessness. Housing ends homelessness. Two, shelter is not
conveniently disappear people and give the illusion that something's being done.
Yeah. Number two, shelter is building and siting a shelter is not any faster than building and siting affordable housing. And, you know, Ron, you brought up a really good point that I just really want to call out here. People for Portland's 2 days ago released their campaign pack, which has raised $320,000 so far toward pushing this ballot measure forward. One of the $50,000 donors to that campaign pack, Killian Pacific, is currently developing a new apartment and mixed use unit in the Central East Side. They are one of the groups that is suing Multnomah County over a 125 bed women's shelter that they don't want to see going in their neighborhood. They called this measure that they're putting forth, everybody deserves safe shelter. With that logic, it seems like everybody deserves safe shelter, but somewhere else. The other things that the People for Portland measure would do would be to require cities to enforce camping ordinances, basically force people into those shelters, sweep them off the streets. And then there are a couple of technical things that really don't even matter that much in the way that the measure is currently being implemented. One, that nobody on the oversight committee could serve as a member of, could also receive funds. And so really, they're just technical fixes until you get to the point where they got really excited about the Texas abortion law, and they allow, if this goes through, anybody to sue Metro regional government if they think that this measure is not being enforced. I share all of this, and I want to be really clear about something. They are not on the ballot yet. There are steps that they need to take to get on the ballot. The first is the legal hurdle. Currently, Metro has said that the ballot measure they put forward is unconstitutional because they have basically proposed an administrative change rather than a full legislative change. It's in court right now. Here Together has an attorney that's interceded to argue on our behalf that this measure should not go forth. If the judge decides that the measure is constitutional, they still have a bunch of steps to go through, including getting 60,000 or 45,000 signatures all before September 8th. So we need to have our eyes on this. We also need to recognize that this is a distraction from the work that's happening now. And it's a way to get the populace to be okay with things that they weren't necessarily okay with before. And we need to be very clear about how we as a community want to compassionately treat our neighbors who are experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity.
That's really helpful, Cole. You know, I'm thinking of a couple of different things here, and in a moment, I want to hear a little bit about this strategy around why the city and county budget process and why it's important for us to raise our voice. But, you know, just like you all are committed to operationalizing policy and sticking with it, I know we as a larger coalition and cohort community are committed to tracking this piece from People for Portland, because I know that there are people whom I love who are fed up with the houselessness in our city and want to do something about it, and will be susceptible to a Make Portland Great Again, People for Portland kind of message. So we will continue to provide resources and to call that out and to notice those dog whistles, I think, really as they come about, that are really going to lead to more criminalization of the houseless community, and also just the convenient disappearing of our friends and neighbors whom we care about. But, you know, this isn't just about defense for People for Portland. There really is a Here Together vision for supportive services, housing, and shelter. And I'm curious, how does that vision connect with a turnout strategy around testimony for the city and county budget process?
Yeah, it's a really great question because it feels like, why would we be focusing on the budget process when there is all of this other
It's
stuff
so
going
not cool, budgets. Help us make budgets exciting. Cool. Why do we care about this?
Here's the thing. Right now, and frankly, every single year, there is an option for us to weigh in on how we want our community to look in our response to homelessness. And right now, I think is critical, especially given how much disinformation has been put out about how shelter is the only way, and we need to make sure that we're just getting people off the streets, that we stand up loud and clear and share why we believe that we need to focus on an all-encompassing, all-in-one approach. Because if we were to get to a point where the elected leaders at the city or the county wanted to devote 75% of the funds toward shelter, they can do that through a budget process, right? So we need to make sure that we're standing up and sharing what we believe in. And this is the key moment to do it. So to that end, Here Together has put together a letter that's got more than 75 organizations and businesses and more than 100 community leaders signing on, that really calls for a budget for the Joint Office of Homeless Services, which is the Multnomah County, City of Portland homeless service provider, that really helps balance, like I said, shelter, housing, services, and everything in between. We also, in our letter, are really calling out 3 key areas that we believe, if implemented at scale in the near term, could have a major impact on our homeless crisis in the long term. One of those is making sure that as we are expanding shelter and transitional housing, we are doing everything that we can to make it temporary. Make sure that we have adequate staffing and case managers, make sure that they're connected to services, make sure that the folks coming in have flexible funding so that if they need an ID or to cover some back rent from their last place, that can all be there. We're also asking for an investment in our region's social service infrastructure and workforce. Look, we are working, the folks on the front lines are doing incredible work to ensure that folks are transitioning into housing. Often they are overworked, underpaid, and most often very traumatized, and folks of color very often. So we are wanting to see living wage investments in the workforce across the board for folks who are doing social service work. And finally, we're looking at ways that we can continue to engage the private market to increase housing stock. There are a lot of really unique opportunities. Actually, today, Multnomah County just released a new program for landlord incentives to bring in private landlords to raise their hands and say, yes, I would like to accept the new regional long-term rent assistance voucher so that I can help folks move from homelessness into housing and also get paid a fair market rent for it. So we really want to see investments in that to really make sure that we are not doing this as just small nonprofit providers or a couple of mom and pop landlords, but really seeing the entire community come together, including developers who are spending $320,000 to try and build a bunch of shelters, but not in their neighborhood.
Cole, I want to thank you so much for being with us tonight. Thanks for all the work that you're doing year round. Thanks for being a part of our Clackamas County work as well, the Land and Housing Coalition. And we're going to shift now so we can prepare our testimony, so we can prepare to take collective strategic action together around this county and city budget process. Know that we're here with you on May 11th, as we'll be turning out folks for that hearing at City Council. But from there and beyond, as we know that we might not be able to raise $320,000 in a day from our whatever money that we have, but we do have people power. We do have people that we know care about this and want to get behind this vision. I mean, if any of you have $320,000 that you'd like to throw at this, we're game for that too. But
it only takes $50,000 each. I think that's how you get up to 320.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Cole. And I'm going to pass it over to Mira, who's going to talk about public story and testimony.
Thanks so much, Ron, and thank you, Cole. Hello, everyone. My name is Mira Wood Bolaños. I use she, her, ella pronouns. I'm an organizer with La Casa Común in the Cully neighborhood in Northeast Portland, and I'm a member of the design team for the Multnomah County Cohort of the Levin Land and Housing Coalition. I'm going to talk a little bit about sharing public stories and giving testimony before decision makers before we hear some examples of public stories around the budget and have the opportunity to work on our own. Public stories are ones that connect our individual stories with stories of others and the systems that impact them. And these stories matter to me because I've experienced the power of people sharing the pressures they're experiencing and how proposed policies would impact them and their loved ones in a real way. These stories are so important because they make a difference in public policy, and also the process of sharing them builds us as leaders and builds collective power. So I want to share a little bit about my experience with public story. Here you can see a picture. This is me and Adelfa. In 2017, I accompanied Adelfa, who was a leader in the Cully neighborhood and a member of CHAT that I'm also a part of, the Cully Housing Action Team, when she testified before City Council about the proposed renter relocation ordinance. Adelfa and many other families had been displaced the year before when their apartment building, the Normandy, you may have heard about it, was sold, and the new owners doubled the rent, which meant that nearly everyone had to move out. When Adelfa went before the council, she introduced herself as a Cully community member and a leader in CHAT, and she shared her own story and asked the city to implement a new policy that would not help her family. She had already been displaced, but would help families in the future who faced similar situations. Adelfa was one of many from Cully who shared their stories at that hearing. And while she shared, CHAT members and other supporters stood behind us and held signs of support. You can move to the next picture. They stood behind us holding signs of support, which showed the power that had been growing for some time in our neighborhood. And it worked. The ordinance was enacted, and since then landlords have been required to pay thousands of dollars to families that they displace through no cause evictions or through exorbitant rent increases. One tool that we're offering as we're crafting our own stories is, and we'll have a chance to practice this in a little bit, is adapted from Marshall Gaines's work, The Story of Self, The Story of Us, The Story of Now. So I'm just going to talk you through this a little bit, talk us through it. So first, the story of self. When we're creating our testimony, which could be written or could be shared, spoken aloud, but we usually begin by writing them to be well prepared. We begin by introducing ourselves and naming the communities that we relate to. This shows that we're part of a collective and our power is greater than just one person. We share a snapshot of our story as it relates to the issue we're speaking about. My neighbor Adelfa shared here that she was displaced from her home and her community when her building was sold, and her children had to move far away from their school. Next, the story of we. In this case, Adelfa wasn't alone in what she was experiencing. She was one of 18 families with a total of 30 children at Rigler Elementary School, one of our neighborhood elementary schools, who was displaced. And she'd been hearing stories of many more in the neighborhood beyond the Normandy, especially immigrant families with limited incomes who were at risk of displacement. And this displacement was at direct odds with this importance of stability and community that are core values for Adelfa, for her neighbors at CHAT, and for most of us, I imagine. And finally, the story of now. What is this particular moment that we are in? What is the opportunity before us? In Adelpha's case, the city was considering a proposal that would require landlords to pay relocation costs for no-cause evictions or rent hikes. So she named specifically her support for this ordinance and shared very specifically the ways that this would enable impacted families to land in a new home with some stability and hopefully dissuade landlords from displacing people. Adelpha is a soft-spoken parent who doesn't speak English fluently. We're both a bit nervous to sit in front of the mayor and the rest of city council, but we did it. We both felt like we were capable and part of something big as people stood behind us and and cheered. They were with us in it as we were with others who were giving their testimonies. And now I'm going to pass the mic to Ron, and we are going to invite you to a public hearing right here and now, where we'll be considering the city budget.
Yes, welcome. I'm going to be shifting from my skills as an interviewer to my role as a city councilor. If you'll just bear with me for a moment. It's been a pandemic. I haven't worn a tie in a while. I am very excited to preside over this city budget hearing and to hear what the constituents of Portland have to say about this budget. Our staffer here, Mira, will be calling the names of the next 3 people who will be offering testimony. Each of you will have 2 minutes to share your testimony. And when you have 10 seconds left for your testimony, Mira, our city staffer, will count down on her fingers. In case you go over, we could not find a gavel at home, but my kids offered this magic wand that I can use to bang on the desk so you know your time is up. And for all of you out there in the gallery, you can just practice as if this is the real thing, observing, standing in solidarity with the people offering testimony, and remembering that the people with the supposed power who maybe are holding fancy gavels, just pretend it's like a magic wand or something. Okay, Mira, will you please call our first 3 people to provide sample testimony this evening?
The first 3 people to provide testimony to our council this evening: Marianne Barham, Dana Buell, Janet Robinson. Please speak into the mic and remember you only have 2 minutes.
Well, I'm going to read my testimony because I am really nervous. I have never done this before. So my name is Marianne Barham, and I'm a member of First Unitarian Church in downtown Portland, and also a leader of the Levin Community Land and Housing Coalition. And I'm here to share a personal story. I grew up in California in the 50s and 60s, the oldest of a family of 9. I have fond memories of childhood, 2 acres of rolling hills, a chaotic household tumbling with kids, and a strong sense of safety and security. And today, I and most of my siblings are fortunate to own our own homes and have a retirement income to support us. But some of my siblings were not so fortunate. 2 of them have struggled with mental illness since early adulthood. I don't think we understand all the causes of mental illness, trauma, genetics, birth order, but I know the impact of mental illness on my brother and sister have been extremely significant. Their lives have been filled with multiple types of instability, physical, emotional, financial, and social. Both of them have been homeless for short periods. At times, they've had trouble holding jobs. They have often not been able to afford basic health care, and their lives are at times filled with damaged relationships. My sister has been arrested a number of times, once for trespassing when she did not have a place to sleep, and she has been court-ordered into a psychiatric hospital twice. Those forced hospital stays were extremely traumatic for her, especially those times when she was physically forced to take her medication. I know this trauma compounded earlier traumas in her life. And so many things, even family reunions, can trigger that trauma for her. Both my brother and sister are well, their lives are stable, and they have a community of family and friends supporting them, but they could easily be living on the streets in Portland or in their vehicles. So I'm here to urge the City Council.
Beep.
Thank you.
Go ahead and finish your last statement.
Okay, you get to let me finish? Okay. I'm here to urge the City Council to dedicate tax dollars to comprehensive solutions for homelessness so that people like my sister can find safety and stability in their lives rather than the trauma that they have experienced currently. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Dana Buell. And next up is Janet Robinson.
Thank you. I'm Dana Buell, a Portland mother of a teenager, a volunteer with Sunnyside Shower Program for Unhoused Neighbors, and the social justice director of First Unitarian Church in downtown Portland. On Tuesday, April 12th, at First Unitarian staff meeting, my colleagues were distressed having just watched the forced removal of teens and young adults camped across 13th Avenue from our church and from outside in. They had been there for a few months, and according to several church members who had gotten to know them, there was mutual support and a sense of community safety. The sweep was done while it hailed. One day after the April snowstorm, one day after a young person, Des, died in her tent. Those displaced were already grieving. They had nowhere to go. Their community was broken apart. This sweep was unconscionable, as are all sweeps. The housing crisis is distressing, and I understand the urgency to fix it. I understand the fatigue that we all feel at seeing makeshift tent villages spring up on seemingly every scrap of land where a tent might fit. And what I also see is not the failing of those who have no home, but rather our failing to make sure every person has a home. My Unitarian Universalist faith proclaims the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We believe all of us are interconnected in a sacred web of life, and it is these beliefs that the fate of those young people on the street is deeply important to me and to us. Our church partners with Portland Homeless Family Solutions and with Outside In. For decades, we hosted a family day shelter in our building, and during the COVID lockdown, provided food distribution for unhoused youth. Organizations like PHFS and Outside In and the Joint Office on Homeless Services work directly with the people experiencing homelessness and have built humane systems to address this human crisis. In Multnomah County, during the last fiscal year alone, more than 11.5 thousand people were helped into permanent housing. 4,000 of those moved directly from homelessness.
Beep, beep, beep.
Path is working. Okay. I urge the city to dedicate our tax dollars to comprehensive solutions to homelessness, as outlined in the Here Together Coalition Roadmap. Healthcare, mental health care, addiction services, affordable housing solutions, trained and well-paid crisis and case managers. Please follow the lead of the people who know best what processes are working for all of us, and we can do this together. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Janet Robinson.
Hello, my name is Janet Robinson. I'm a member of St. Philip the Deacon Episcopal Church, and our church has just recently, after many tries, been awarded a huge sum of money from the city to build 75 units for seniors who have lost their housing or are about to lose housing. As we have been talking, housing is one important piece, but without support, it's not going to be successful for people. We are partnering with the Northwest Pilot Projects Agency, a 501(c) nonprofit that offers wraparound services, some of which have been mentioned, but some of which have not been mentioned. They really do a number of things to make housing more successful for people who have not had housing or almost not had housing. They do certainly information and referral to other resources, which is important. They also provide moving assistance, basic furniture deposits for people who are beginning anew in a house. They do eviction prevention and also transportation services for housing appointments, medical appointments, shopping. And they also help people in housing in new communities, which is probably true for many of the new residents in a housing project, to connect with the community. We have a library right next door. We have a gym very close, but this helps with problem solving. And what I will say as I finish my 2 minutes is
Beep, beep, beep.
I just want to remind the City Council that these kind of services are very, very important for the success of housing people.
Would like to thank you all for your time and for being advocates in this community and sharing your testimonies with us. We will adjourn this hearing so that all of us in the gallery can debrief and talk about this experience. Okay, we're going to do a little debrief. We invite you to come back to the gallery so you can see everyone's faces in this space. Really want to say thank you to Marianne and Dana and Janet. So y'all can wave your fingers, clap your hands, give some snaps. That was amazing. Thank you all so much for going first and for modeling for us what it might feel like to offer some testimony. And so I would love to ask, and you can take yourself off mute, or you could feel free to use the chat, but where did you see the framework that Mira introduced earlier, this story of self, us, and now at play in these different testimonies from Dana and Marianne and Janet? Where did you see self, us, and now at play?
I would say that Marianne connecting her own family story and the power in that being sucked in. This is someone from my family, and it's saying they would not be taken care like if we don't have these services at Portland. It really hooked in, coming from the personal story first and then expanding.
I think Dana humanizing the people who live across from the church and demonstrating the connection with those who have housing and those who don't was also very powerful.
Yes, thank you, Diana.
I heard the story of now and that sense of urgency because Dana was speaking to sweeps that just happened last week. And Janet was speaking to something that your community has been, and all of us, like working for so long to get the money in order to build these units that might now be at risk of not having the full vision realized if that funding doesn't happen. So just a sense of like of why this makes a difference right now.
What were some of the powerful things? I mean, you all have started to name some of this, even as we've named how story of self, us, and now show up in these testimonies. But for those of you who were listening in, who may have been in our mock gallery over in City Hall, I mean, what was powerful about these testimonies? Were there some specific pieces that really stood out to you?
I think the main strength was that they weren't theoretical at all. They were all very personal. The three people were not people who were homeless, but their stories were very, very personal. And even like the third story talking about that shows the community people are very concerned about it and are working hard after many years to get funding. So they were all very personal, which is much more powerful. So
I would also say, as one who's in the work of providing supportive services, to hear folks in testimony account for the importance of support services and wraparound services. Cole spoke to that, and then all of these testimonies said, pay attention to this, city officials, because it's not about warehousing, it's about housing. And that's what I heard come through really loud and clear was, we could warehouse outside the city and then out of sight, out of mind, and let's just not treat them like human beings. Or we can actually do the work of housing and supporting, and recognizing those support services is huge. So I appreciated that.
Other powerful moments.
I appreciated the sentiment that focusing on the Here Together strategy as a more effective method to solve homelessness. So it's not set up as like one side is like, oh, we're fine with homelessness around, the other side saying, no, we need to solve to have more urgency to do away with it. I feel like it's I appreciated, well, you all, but also Cole's really focusing on we're treating it with urgency through strategies that are really going to work longer term and in the shorter term, instead of just the revolving door of shelter space.
Wearing the suit and tie and playing that role, or trying to listen with that viewpoint in mind, and having been to quite a few city council hearings in the past, there's a lot of testimony where it isn't story based, and it is a lot of like just getting yelled at, and a lot of like theoretical ideology, maybe even, and trying to pretend what would it feel like to be a city councilor to hear these stories. Like for me, I felt really invited in to be a part of something different. And so it was really powerful. Like I could find my way into this story and into a next step that had me respond in a different way than maybe had it not been led with story. So it was really powerful for me.
For me, whoops.
Go ahead, LaVeta, and then Melissa.
Okay, what I found powerful was when I looked at the testimony was intergenerational. It was about people who were young people who were adults and seniors. And it wove this beautiful thread of wraparound services, are services that are needed across the generations. It's not just for people who have mental health issues, it's for young people, it's for seniors. And I appreciated how Janet expanded what wraparound services meant, something of, going to an appointment. We don't think about that as a wraparound service, but that is a very important appointment if you're a person who can't get around. So I appreciated the breadth and depth of the testimony that was given. It helped to create a broader picture.
Melissa, you were going to share?
I really loved and was moved by the way Dana talked about her faith and the values of her faith community. Sometimes those of us with collars will get up and it will be like a moral hammer and like, we're just going to tell you, but because it was enfleshed in story of real people and her community actively engaged, then to bring in the values and the trust that like undergirds like part of what moves them was really, really well done and moving, and I think could connect with anybody of any faith in a really beautiful way.
I'm going to ask a different question, and we so appreciate Dana and Janet and Marianne sharing with us, but here's a harder question. What was missing, or where could it have been more impactful, so we can continue to learn and grow as people who might offer some testimony? And feel free, if you offered testimony after having done it, if there's something that you want to say, here's how I would maybe do that a little bit differently, feel free to share too. But what was missing? Where could it have been maybe more impactful?
I'll speak to that last part, which is the punchline it has more impact if you can get to the punchline, which I saved for the end. And I was even cutting stuff out. I didn't know how it was going to go tonight. I didn't know how strict you were going to be about the 2 minutes. I knew that my testimony was 3 minutes long. So as Marianne was talking, I'm like cutting stuff out and still didn't get to the punchline. Dang it. So missing a sense of like what aspects are the most important to hear. Like you want to bring people in, but where is that, just what could be cut from that so that you can get to the punchline, but not lose the moral grounding, the personal story, and that. So happy for suggestions.
I just want to piggyback on that because I too was looking to cut as I watched the first two of you and left out completely kind of how I was drawn into the homelessness projects and so on in Lebanon, and that was definitely missing, and I didn't cut it out purposefully, but I was cutting and it got left out.
I wonder if it might work to say like, hey, I'm Micah, these are the communities I belong with, this is what I'm here for because, and then going into the story. So you don't miss that, like, yeah, the punchline like you called it.
I like that idea. Maybe we need to offer the punchline at the beginning, and then if we have a shot at it, we can repeat it at the end.
Sarah also adds in the chat, remember, we can still submit our full testimonies in written form in case we do get cut off or we're having to cut on the fly. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I think when we talk about wraparound services, it might be very helpful to mention that wraparound services include drug treatment, because drug involvement is very widespread among our unhoused neighbors. And we can't shirk that issue. And you don't have to go into detail because you don't have much time. It was hard enough to get through your what you had to say, but I think just in mentioning wraparound services, I think it would be wise to say that that includes drug treatment. Otherwise, I think some of my neighbors just, that's all they can think about. And I'm arguing with them all the time, but we have to keep that in mind.
I would also, just in terms of the testimony, and I don't know, I might be bringing some New York energy into this, but like own the power of where you are at, and that is like that's your microphone and your 2 minutes, and don't be intimidated by that beat. Speak over it, and even if you just have, I mean, there's no like culture. They're not gonna just wheel you off. Like you don't have to. Don't be rude and speak for like 5 minutes. You'll lose them, but speak over that beep and tell that punchline. They have an extra sting after the beep. Like they're just own your place there. You're not just speaking for yourself, you're speaking for the people you're bringing with, you're speaking for those services. Remember the power that you have at that moment. And it's a power that will be shared in that whole room with all those people in those shirts.
Thank you. I think we need a little bit of that New York assertiveness.
Yeah, I want to do it again because that punchline, man, watch out. Thank you, Chris.
Well, you're going to have the opportunity to on May 11th. We look forward to sticking the punchline landing. The one thing I would name that maybe I missed in there or could also see is, you know, we live in Portland where not everyone really understands congregations or faith communities. And so I wonder how we might bring in not just components of our faith, but like, I'm a part of this congregation, which has this many members, or I'm a part of this coalition, which is connected to this many congregations, really to show like, with our powers combined, how big we really are in a city or in a state or in a region of the country where, you know, faith communities or congregations is not the norm. So that might be something that I would be curious how we can weave that in. But I'm going to pass it over to Mira, who's going to get us set up so we can begin drafting and practicing a little bit of testimony together tonight.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Ron. We're going to have just about 3 minutes, which won't be enough time, but just to begin drafting our testimonies. And we'll have this tool, My Public Story, pasted in the chat. So I invite you to click on that and open it so you can look at it and either type in like copy and paste and create your own document, or you can be taking notes on your notebook. This part will just be about 3 minutes, so you're not going to be able to complete it. But after that, we're going to go into one-to-one conversations, and you'll have the opportunity to practice with one other person. We're not going for perfection, but just jump in. Yeah, see what's there for you. So we're going to start this 3 minutes now. If you have any trouble opening the document, I just recommend don't worry about it. Don't get stuck in that. Just practice, use the self, us, now. Story of self, story of us, story of now. So, all right, 3 minutes. Go ahead.
We want to welcome you all back. I know that was really quick to begin to brainstorm around self, us, and now for preparing your own testimony, and a very quick one-to-one to start to share some of that initial thinking and hopefully receive a little bit of feedback. We're going to begin to wind down towards the close of our time together this evening, but wanted to touch on one final piece before Sarah shares some next steps and we have evaluation and some closeout. And that's around turnout strategy. I know for me, I feel a certain amount of muscle atrophy when it comes to turning folks out to take action. There have been so many constraints the last couple of years on how do we show up for things? How do we come together when everyone feels so overwhelmed already? How might I invite somebody to take action in this moment? And so I want to mention a few things that we've learned over the years around turnout strategy. I think Melissa put a doc in the chat that you can read more comprehensively later, but this is really just a way of thinking about how do we turn the people who we already have in our lives, the folks that we are connected to relationally, either because we've had one-to-ones with them or because we know they care about this issue or because we share a common faith community. That might be the ground of the invitation to be a part of this. And we're specifically trying to turn people out to write testimony, to email their city councilors, and to show up from 2 to 5 p.m. on Wednesday, May 11th to provide 2 minutes of testimony. People for Portland, when they got started saying that they speak for Portland, they got started by a 700-person survey. So their entire platform is built on a 700-person survey. And so I'm not sure we'll set a turnout goal here for this May 11th of having 700 people who will write testimony and care. But we're not far, given all of the relationships that we have in our lives and people that we know who care about this issue and people we know who are connected to our faith communities. We could blow past 700 as we begin to build our own collective muscle around showing up and turning out to collectively act. And so this is just a start. It's a little bit of a stress test for us to see, hey, with our powers combined, how many folks can we turn out connected to this issue? And if your faith community is in a place where you're like, we really haven't been talking specifically about the budget or housing, we're kind of on a different track, that's okay. But we encourage you to think about how to turn people out anyways, because next month or 3 months from now or 6 months from now, we might be turning out for you. And that's one of the beautiful things about being a part of a cohort or a coalition collective community, is we show up for one another. And so this has begun to be surfaced through our work, as Marianne reminded us, and we're able to turn people out for it, to show our power in the face of organized money and powerful interests. The last thing maybe I would mention about turnout strategy, or just re-emphasize, is that the best turnout strategy is relational. So it's literally calling people or sending a text message and making the connection between why you're inviting them to this thing and what you know about this person. There's no shortcuts. Getting it in the congregational newsletter or having your pastor make the announcement from the pulpit, those are fine and maybe could be a part of your turnout strategy. But really the good old fashioned, like, these are 5 people I know, faces that come to mind when I hear these testimonies of people who would be moved and willing to also either offer some testimony or at least show up to be in support. So I invite you to start from there, and that's how we'll weave our collective mobilization and show City Council that we care about this and we're not going anywhere. Yes, Cindy, question.
Are we asking people to, is it in person or is it online or is it both?
This is a great question and a great segue where I'm going to pass it over to Sarah, who in her next steps is going to give us, like, okay, we've heard some information, give us the nuts and bolts stuff. Sarah?
Yeah, thanks, Ron. And Josh, if you could pull up the next step slides, and I'll get to your question in just a second, Cindy. But I also just want to lift up and celebrate the amazing work that many of you and your core teams are doing, hosting house meetings around your own projects, around housing pressures, around migration, around your land stories. All of that work that is happening right now is helping to build our relationships and our power and our connections. And they're also great opportunities to talk about this very specific action and way that we can show up collectively. So keep hosting those house meetings and keep sharing with us the updates about what's happening so we can move alongside you and send prayers your way and celebrate our collective work together. Next, coming off of tonight, hopefully you already have a little bit of a draft of what your testimony might be, but we encourage you to finish your public story. You can use that worksheet that Mira shared with us before. And then we want you to share your testimony 3 ways. And we'll send out a sheet that has all these details and links, but you're going to email it to your city and county officials. There's a tool that'll make it really easy for you to do that. You're going to submit it on the official city portal. And then you're going to email it to me so that we can collect those stories and have them to track our participation in this and test a little bit. What is our ability right now to generate testimony? And also so that we can know the stories in our own community and use those in our ongoing work. When you're submitting your testimony, one thing to think about is that the county commissioners are just, or the county commissioner, the chair is just about to release their budget at the end of the week. So if you're able to get it in before then, that's awesome. And the earlier in the process of the hearings that will be happening throughout May is always better to get it on the earlier end if you can. So please finish your story, submit your testimony. Next, we want you to invite others to join you. So use that turnout strategy, meet with your core team. You have the chance in breakout groups right after this to meet with your core team if you'd like, or in your next meeting, and try to invite others with some strategy into this work. And we're going to be turning out our congregation and community members to both submit their own testimony in written form, but also to join us at that city budget hearing on Wednesday, May 11th, in person from 2 to 5 p.m. And when I talked to the city budget office last week, they said there would not be a virtual option, that they're actually going back to how city council meetings were before. So all in person. If anything changes, I'll let you know. And wear red. We're going to try to, we'll send this in the email too, but we want to show up as a coordinated community and show our collective power, and that this is an emergency for our communities. There is some urgency here. So we will be wearing red together to that city budget hearing.
Sarah, can you please enable the sharing of that last doc in the chat, please? It's in the chat, but I don't think people can access it.
The testimony 3 ways doc.
Yeah, please.
Yes, I will in just a second. Okay. Thanks for the heads up on that. And then, so we'll see you all on May 11th, and then hopefully we will celebrate that the budgets are passed with all of this funding, and then we'll come together again at the end of May for our cohort gathering on the 25th. LaVeta, will you lead us in an evaluation?
There we go. So as you think about our gathering tonight, one of the things that we always do is evaluate our gatherings so that we can learn from them. And so I'd like you to think, what was helpful or useful or motivating about tonight's gathering for you? What was helpful, useful, or motivating for you? And I also want you to think about, what are you still curious about? Or where do you need more pause or time to make meaning? Make some more meaning. What was helpful? And I invite you to share that in the chat so that we as a team can take your feedback and learn from it as we are always creating these gatherings for us. Hearing the personal stories during the practice testimonies were very moving and powerful. It was also good to see the logistics of how it will work. That's from Mika. From Cindy, it was all useful. It was great to get educated by Cole, but also it was great to hear the testimonies and to speak one-to-one about them. From Mira, it was motivating to hear the 3 testimonies, and I also feel energized by my conversation with Desiree, who is here for the first time. Welcome, Desiree. I hope I said your name correctly. Good. Is there anything you're still curious about, or where do you need more time? Learning more about the People for Portland proposal. From Jeanette. From Kate, it's very helpful to hear Cole's perspective, and turnout strategies are useful. From Diana, modeling the testimony was powerful. Also being paired with Andy was terrific. Got a lot of useful information and pointers, huh? From Kath Clark, it was great to hear those testimonies, and also helpful to talk about ideas in a one-to-one. Yeah. I'd like to learn about some other initiatives, such as the Safe Rest Village project. Okay, that's from Jeanette O'Brien. Well, I encourage you to continue sharing your evaluation of our gathering today. And I'll remind you to stay on after the closing if you would like to have some time to meet with your core team. We will list the rooms that the core teams will be in so that you can go to those gatherings and meet with your team. And now I'm going to turn it over to Yasmin, who's just going to bring us our closing by sharing a little bit of the poem that we heard at the beginning.
Gracias, LaVeta, y gracias a todos. Voy a leer una pequeña parte solamente del poema. Durante nuestra vida, solo realizamos una minúscula parte de esa magnífica empresa que elabora de Dios. Nada de lo que hacemos está acabado, lo que significa que el reino está siempre ante nosotros. Ninguna declaración dice todo lo que podrías decirse. Ninguna oración puede expresar plenamente nuestra fe. Ninguna confesión trae la perfección, ninguna visión pastoral trae la integridad. Ningún programa realiza la misión de la iglesia. En ningún esquema, metas y objetivos se incluye todo. Esto es lo que intentamos hacer. Plantamos semillas que un día crecerán. Regaremos semillas plantadas sabiendo que son promesas del futuro. Y así cerramos. Pues muchas gracias. Gracias a todos por estar aquí presente y por seguir en la lucha de nuestras tierras y seguir recordando a nuestros ancestros.